Is that there are multiple statuses for people who are in this country, a variety of ways that they come to the United States, and explaining both that fact as well as sort of the history of immigration to this country, which I won't get into too much, but modern history around immigration reform. And I make that point because as a state legislator, what I really want to emphasize is that what I'm really looking to do is sort of focus on what we can do as a state to make sure that every one of our communities is safe and every single resident, whether those who are legal or whether those who are undocumented, and sort of make the point that, you know, my role, focus on public safety, protection, is different, of course, from what the federal government is doing and what a federal elected official is doing. So on the federal side, it's important to realize that, you know, we've usually had every, say, 2 decades an immigration reform that allows those who are undocumented to apply and to become legal residents or legal U.S. citizens. And probably a lot of people don't know that, but the last reform was under President Reagan in 1986, and that was a process that allowed millions of undocumented immigrants to become legal. And since then, there has not been immigration reform. There was an attempt under President Bush, President George W. Bush. It was defeated. There was an attempt by President Obama, and that was defeated. And we'll see what happens with President Trump. I think he's said a variety of things. Some things he's indicated he might support immigration reform, but I'm generally skeptical, because right now I think the majority in Congress are opposed to that. So that sort of presents to Massachusetts, just like every state, what is the relationship between our state agencies, our state and local law enforcement, our communities, and undocumented immigrants. So in Massachusetts, there are approximately 140,000 undocumented immigrants. It's quite a small number compared to our 6.5 million resident population. And it's important to emphasize that there are undocumented immigrants who live in every community. They're here in Acton. Number are my friends. They're obviously my constituents, people that I've sat down and talked with about these issues. And I will say what's really changed since our new president was sworn in is that there's a very different approach towards how ICE agents, how federal law enforcement are dealing with undocumented immigrants. And so what has happened is that President Trump, who issued 2 executive orders that my bill, the Safe Communities Act, is looking to address, he changed the prioritization for who should be targeted to be arrested and deported. So before, the policy was that if you were an undocumented immigrant and you had committed a violent crime or a serious crime, that you were a priority for deportation, and that's a policy that I support and is reasonable, of course. And what President Trump has changed, and I urge you to look at the executive order from January, is that it said anyone, not only who has been just arrested, but anyone who could be a harm to the community or to public safety. And so anyone who is a lawyer knows that that's a very easily sort of definable standard in terms of it's easy for an ICE agent to say, well, that means that basically everyone in the community who is undocumented is somehow, in his or her opinion, a harm to the community and therefore should be arrested. This is happening now, and I think most people here know that, but just to give an example of a family in Acton that I recently sat down with is, I was a family originally from Brazil, and the husband was, he's a truck driver, and he was driving through another state. He pulled off into a rest area to get some coffee, And at that rest area, as far as I can tell from meeting with his wife a couple weeks ago, ICE agents sort of swarmed the rest area and basically interviewed anyone that my guess is, looked dark-skinned or looked Latino, and interviewed this Acton resident, and he said no, he did not have legal papers. And so even though he didn't have a criminal record, he had never been arrested, he was undocumented, so he was detained, and he was held in a jail in Ohio, which was the state where he was. So I sat down with the wife and the kids just a couple weeks ago, and obviously very scared, and although he was released from jail, he is now under deportation proceedings. And I understand that, the common refrain that I get, from some constituents is, well, what don't you get about the word illegal, or illegal is illegal? But I guess the point is, from a practical sense, we have families, we have residents in Massachusetts who are here, who are undocumented for a wide variety of reasons, but more often than not to provide a better life for their kids, often fleeing from repression, from very, very scary economic and political dynamic, especially in a lot of Central American countries. And they're here to provide a better life for their kids. And at the federal level, the decision is, how do we sort of figure out what the process is? Because there's about 11 million undocumented immigrants. There is no way that all those individuals are going to be deported, not to mention the fact that I think the estimate is it would cost around $300 to $400 billion to deport these families. So the dynamic then for us here in Massachusetts as residents, whether as citizens of Massachusetts or residents of communities like Acton, is what is the interaction between law enforcement, local law enforcement, and these families. So I think the important thing that I think about in terms of the bill I filed is that when you come home from work, when you're at home over the weekend, is that you have a general assurance that your home is your castle, that you're not going to be you're not going to have anyone knocking on your door and pulling you out and arresting you or sending you to jail. And the dynamic that has changed with ICE agents is that because of that different standard by President Trump, that's what many ICE agents are doing in sort of a targeted manner. So in this area, what often the ICE agents are doing is they're going to the courthouses where they are targeting people that they have on a list who are undocumented. They're going to places of business where there are a significant number of immigrant workers and interviewing people or asking for their ID. There are some stories, and they haven't been confirmed, but they're going to communities like Framingham, which has a large immigrant population, and asking people for their IDs as they're walking around downtown, although it's not entirely clear how often they're doing that. So the question then for us as Massachusetts residents is what is the best interaction between local law enforcement and all residents? And what I would say is that we want to make sure that families, even if they have violated immigration law in coming to this country, which again is a civil violation, you want to make sure that they are comfortable to report a crime in their community, that they have the trust with the local and state police, because if you don't have that trust, it actually makes all of us less safe. If someone, his wife is undocumented and they see something wrong going on in the community, if they think that the local or state police officer can act essentially as an immigration official, they're not going to be calling that police officer, and that harms all of us. And so while we're waiting to see what happens with the federal government with respect to immigration reform, with respect to what other policies President Trump implements, my focus, and I think most residents would focus on how do we make sure that everybody is the most safe. And I think the thing I really want to emphasize is that in getting to know many families that one of the spouses is undocumented, or getting to know a family that is undocumented, is that they're just like all of us. They're here to provide a better life for their kids, extremely hardworking, and just very, very proud to be here, and really in every sense of the word consider themselves American. So if that's the dynamic, what do we do here at the state and local level to be welcoming? So the legislation that I have filed, the Safe Communities Act, which is Senate 1305, House 3269, would do a few things, and it actually doesn't just deal with undocumented immigrants, although that's often what I hear the most about. Is that what it would say is that local and state police would not honor a detainer from an ICE agent if someone gets arrested. So what a detainer is it's just a decision by the federal government to detain or arrest someone, but there's no due process. And it's really important to think about that, because if any one of us was accused of a crime, before anyone can get placed in jail, there has to be an issue from a district attorney, from a prosecutor, or for a judge. A detainer from an ICE agent doesn't go through that process, so it doesn't involve due process. It's just a decision by the federal government to detain someone. And the concern about that is, given President Trump's change in executive order, you now have virtually every undocumented immigrant and his or her family at risk of being arrested and deported. And again, I just think at the end of the day, the idea that we're going to deport 11 million residents here in the United States is very unrealistic. So the bill would basically say that unless there is an actual warrant to local or state police, that the person who might be arrested for some minor crime, shoplifting or something, or a speeding violation, could not be detained in a jail unless there was that warrant from a judge or from the federal government. So it's separate from a detainer. And again, this underscores how complicated not only immigration law is, but our court system. So that is sort of a key piece of the Safe Communities Act, and I think that one of the things that's important to realize is that the vast majority of police chiefs that I talk to, and police officers, including those here in Acton, essentially already have this policy, because they recognize that if they are seen as enforcement agents for immigration law, it's going to make their community less safe. And that's why you've heard testimony from some of the Acton police officers about this. So in many ways, this policy is already the case in Acton. But the reason I filed the Safe Communities Act is that I do think we need a statewide policy. And it's as simple as the fact that every one of us every day crosses multiple towns to get to work, to do our errands, to go shopping, to see family and friends. And so if you have a mix of policies town by town, it's not going to create that level of assurance and safety for any one of us, including immigrant families. So that is one part of the bill. The other part of the bill deals with the fact that obviously you've had President Trump issue another executive order that was banning people coming from 8 majority Muslim countries to the United States. As we know, that order has been contested and has been effectively stopped right now by the federal courts. We'll see if the Supreme Court takes up the case. But it brings up an issue about the idea of targeting people based on their religion. And one of the things that we can do here in Massachusetts is making sure that when we're talking about our taxpayer dollars, that we don't have to participate in that. President Trump, when he was campaigning, talked about the idea of creating a Muslim registry, so requiring all Muslim Americans to register, something that to me is a very deeply disturbing proposal. And so what the bill would do is say that no state resources, so the RMV, mass health database, local voter registration database, that could not be used to aid and support a so-called Muslim registry or any other registry based on someone's nationality, ethnicity, or religion. So that's an opportunity to make a point which in some ways is we're seeing a reversal from, just quickly, from a partisan point of view. You're seeing a sort of reversal of roles, right? Because I think it's accurate to say that the philosophy for many conservatives or Republicans is the idea of states' rights, right? And that the federal government shouldn't be too powerful. And more often than not, Democrats or liberals were looking for a stronger federal government to do a whole variety of things. So now that's getting reversed a little because you're seeing an immense exertion of federal power. And the best example is President Trump's threat to withhold federal money from so-called sanctuary cities, which was just rejected at a court in Hawaii. So the idea is that if we're talking about our taxpayer dollars and our resources, our control over how to use that information and whether or not to support the policies of our president. So the bill would prevent that, so it would prohibit the use of state resources for that purpose. And the last part of the bill deals with something that's already been an issue in Massachusetts, which you may have read about, is that you have a number of sheriffs, county sheriffs, not in this area, more in southeastern Massachusetts, that are deputizing their employees, their deputy sheriffs, to act as immigration agents. So what that means is that they're empowering their employees to go out there and act as immigration agents. And I guess I would really just stress that it's really critical to separate federal and state law and when we're talking about enforcement, because not only is it something that will cost more money for our local and state police, but it also will make many families who may have committed a federal offense. And when I say that, the focus is on immigration law, but not paying your taxes, white collar crime, SEC fraud, those are all federal crimes. The idea that local police would be involved in enforcing those laws, to me, doesn't make a lot of sense. And part of that is, and I always think about this growing up in Acton, is that I had a number of classmates whose parents committed white collar crime, committed securities frauds in their professions, but I wouldn't have wanted their kids or the spouses to not be able to call the local police if a burglar had broken into their home or if they saw someone suspicious in the home. So I know that there's sort of an immediate focus on immigration law and enforcing that, but I guess the point is that if you were to sort of cast that spectrum to other federal laws, you would be talking about the local and state police being involved with someone not paying their taxes or committing securities fraud or committing some arcane federal property violation. So if we go down that road, to me it's not only a very complicated and costly endeavor, but it's also something that makes people feel less safe and are less safe. And one of the very powerful statements we had from the city of Chelsea police chief a few weeks ago at the State House, which is a city that has a large percentage of immigrants, some of whom are undocumented, is that he really needed to see the Safe Communities Act implemented to make sure that he could best do his job. And I think that's the thing to really remember, is that more often than not, obviously there's some exceptions, police chiefs are getting behind the Safe Communities Act. You're seeing more and more communities pass this policy. And the local police officer doesn't want to be involved with enforcing immigration law. It's very messy, it's very costly, and again, it makes communities less safe. So that is the legislation that I have filed. Obviously, as you saw from outside the church on Central Street, it's a controversial one, and welcome any comments or discussion about immigration law and my filing this legislation. It is not a new bill. It's a bill that I filed for the past 2 sessions. We added the provision about the Muslim ban because of some of the comments by President Trump, but it's nothing new. So it's something that's been heard by committee a couple times. I will say it's gaining momentum because I think people are seeing the reality on the ground of President Trump's executive orders. And the study that just came out yesterday that was reported is that now half of the undocumented immigrants who are getting deported in this country were never arrested and have no criminal record. And so, is that something we as a country want to do versus focusing our resources on those who have committed serious crimes, and then beginning to have that discussion about immigration reform, which has passed, every 2 or 3 decades, there is a federal immigration reform. This is the longest delay since, mostly because Republicans in Congress haven't agreed to pass it. So that's what the legislation is. I welcome any questions, obviously from the advocacy point of view, reaching out to your state representative and state senator, if I'm not your state senator, to advocate for the legislation. There are a lot of rallies, there are a lot of meetings to talk about not only this issue, but just how to protect immigrants in general. I know this church has been a big part of that. I really appreciate it being part of this series. I'm going to Framingham later today to be on another panel to talk about immigrant rights and sort of the dynamic of how these policies affect the Massachusetts economy, because it also will affect our economy significantly as well. So thanks very much, and happy to go into questions.
Well, it's a problem that just didn't happen overnight. It's been decades.
Yes.
Nothing's broken. Laws were never enforced. So you keep calling them immigrants, and immigrants are immigrants. We're talking about someone who came through a border illegally. They didn't come through the border of the state law. They came to the United States of America, which is a sovereign nation. So federal law should cover them, not you as a senator, state senator, or a state representative, or a town mayor, or the state governor. It's gotten totally out of hand, and using descriptions like this. Right now, these people, as you pointed out, they could have come anytime they wanted to over the last 30 years and filed to become a citizen. They didn't. They failed to do that. We are now at the tune of something like $57 billion a year through deportation, through legislature, and every other thing that I can think of. So we cannot carry that ball. We cannot carry 57. Right now, our government is spending something like if each of us had to pay our national debt, it'd be well over $150,000. So to put another, burden on our back is just not common sense. It's somewhat suicidal. Thank you so much.
So I'm happy to. Oh yeah, I'm sorry.
Because of the way we're taping and sounding, we're going to ask if Senator Eldridge will kind of repeat the question so that when it's broadcast, we get the question and then we get the answer. So that's a good one to start.
I'll do my best. So I believe what your question was is that this is not a new problem. This is something that's been going on for a very long time, and that people who came to this country without legal authorization could have done it through a legal means. And then you also asked about the cost to I think taxpayers by undocumented immigrants. So just to respond to your last assertion is that I would really respectfully disagree, because first of all, undocumented immigrants, they're not eligible for public benefits, and the families that I meet that are undocumented, I mean, they're working generally 2 or 3 jobs. They don't get mass health. They don't get welfare benefits. It's against the law. So, and they're paying taxes. They are paying taxes. It's something called a ITIN number. So you can get an IRS, basically a business taxpayer number, and you pay your taxes. And the reason many of them are doing that is because they're hoping to become naturalized citizens. And therefore they're paying their taxes so that when they do apply, that it's legal.
They've had decades. I just said there's 11 million of them. How many of them got up to the plate and decided to go through the process? Few. I mean, I think that's a very lame answer.
The only thing I would say is that I think it's important to realize that it's a very broken immigration system in terms of those who are
enforced. It's never been.
No, I'm talking about. Excuse me, sir. In terms of those who apply to enter this country, it's very limited from many countries. So the ability to get into this country, in terms of getting in a line, there really is no line for many countries. Good question? Yes?
Can you tell us something about the steps that your legislation needs to go through now, where it is in the process and what needs to be done next?
Sure, so the steps for the Safe Communities Act, so the bill is in the Public Safety Committee. So the bill will have a hearing sometime either this summer or fall, and it has been reported out of committee in the past, so if it was reported out, then it would likely go to the Senate and then go to the House. The governor has so far said that he opposes the bill, so I think there's a lot of organizing that needs to be done, but that's the process for the bill, like any bill. Mm-hmm. Yes, sir.
My question is how many families have you met with that have family members murdered by illegals or raped or harmed? How many of those families have you met with?
Yeah, so the question is how many families I've met who've been harmed by undocumented immigrant. So I think this is one of the tactics, with all due respect, that some conservatives take, is that they focus on the very limited number of crimes by undocumented immigrants against those who are legal U.S. citizens, and therefore project that all undocumented immigrants shouldn't be in
So if there's so few, how many have you met with?
Oh, excuse me, sir, I'm answering.
Okay.
Okay. So I think one of the important things to realize, and there was a study recently done, is that legal immigrants and undocumented immigrants commit crimes at far lower levels than those who are Americans. And so I do feel like it's a bit of a red herring.
So the answer is 0.
Well, I will tell you why it's 0 is that actually I haven't.
Thank you. That's all I needed to know, sir.
I haven't had any families in my district that have reached out to me that were harmed.
But you didn't feel strong enough to meet with them. Your heart didn't go out to their grief. You give a nod of sadness to their families on the Carlson show, but in reality, you don't actually, where the rubber hits the road, you don't actually feel for these people because you actually don't feel for them the way you feel for people who came here illegally. Is that true?
No, to be very, very specific, literally have not had any constituent reach out to me in my district who has been harmed by an undocumented immigrant. So think about that.
Okay.
But that's your job, not necessarily
Yes, sir.
theirs.
Yes, my name is Ralph Belmore from Marlboro. What part of your bill would have any emphasis on how we vet any of these individuals coming in from other countries? Is there a provision in your bill that will address that?
So the question is, does the bill have any section to it that deals with the vetting of immigrants who come to this country? So no, there isn't, because that's federal law, so I'm not involved with that. So I'm just working on, well, it's just to be very clear, I could not file such a bill, right? So I'm a state legislator, working with police chiefs, working with community advocates, immigrant rights organizations that are focused on this from a compassion point of view, but also from a public safety point of view. Yes?
I understand your bill prevents local law enforcement and authorities and agencies from cooperating with federal ICE immigration. If you break that tie, how do you find out if somebody that is arrested locally has major crime similes? If you break the tie between local law enforcement and federal, somebody who's committed a federal crime, you don't know about it when they're arrested locally. How do you deal with it?
So the question is about how do you know if there's a separation between ICE agents and local and state law enforcement? How do you find out if a person who is arrested has committed a serious crime, perhaps a federal crime? So, and this is probably where I should have explained the dynamic a little better. It's confusing, and often a police chief does it better, is that any one of us who is arrested and fingerprinted goes to a federal database, and so that database, both state and federal, will show if any one of us has committed a serious crime, and if we have, that's probable cause, and you would be detained in jail, and that's whether you're undocumented, a legal resident, or a U.S. citizen. So the distinction here is that ICE agents are coming to our police stations, our courts, places of worship, places of work, not focus on any other federal crime other than the civil violation of coming into this country without legal authorization. So if the person has committed a serious crime, or there's a probable cause by the local police that they have committed a crime but were never arrested for it, the local and state police retain and still have the right to hold a person, whether they're a U.S. citizen or undocumented.
But you prohibited them from even contacting or cooperating with any federal official.
No, nope, that's not true.
That's the way the bill reads to me, that's the way I read it.
I guess
Prohibiting them.
it's really important to realize that a detainer is just about someone who, it's about their legal status.
The bill specifically says no cooperation between local authorities and agencies and federal officials. You want to protect the people from federal officials. I think he said that someplace. He once said, we need to make sure every resident in every single state and town is safe from federal authorities.
From federal ICE agents, yep, who right now are issuing a lot of these warrants for people that haven't committed any crimes. That's the distinction. Yes?
And I'm wrong, my understanding was that you were just asking for due process, which is a constitutional right for citizens, and I would think in our history, it's a right of due process should be for every human being. And this was my understanding. Am I interpreting this correctly?
Yeah, so the question's about it ultimately, is this bill largely about due process? I think it is, and I think it's really important if any one of us can put ourselves in the shoes of someone who is undocumented, is that if you were arrested and you are a U.S. citizen and you're arrested for, shoplifting or some sort of vehicle, hitting a car or some vehicle violation, you would go to the police station and there would be bail posted, or you'd be released on personal recognizance if you don't have a record. And unless there's something else in your criminal background check, you would not be held, you'd be released. And that sounds reasonable, right? That's due process. So essentially what this bill is looking to do is provide those same protections for someone who is undocumented but hasn't committed any serious or violent crimes. The due process question is a great one because in many ways this bill is being taken up by a court about whether just police detaining someone who's undocumented but hasn't committed any crimes, whether he or she can be held. And there is a good chance the court will say that yeah, the police can't hold that person, just like the police can't hold any one of us who is a U.S. citizen unless there's probable cause or we've committed a serious crime. Yes?
What specifically are ICE agents?
Yeah, great question. So what are ICE agents? So ICE agents are the federal agents that are charged with enforcing immigration law. And I think to me what's a bit scary about ICE agents is that we're a country that very proudly has never had a federal police. The idea that more often than not, public safety is something that's a local issue. You know your local police officer. You have state police that are jurisdiction just Massachusetts. And the concern is that in many ways, what President Trump is doing with ICE agents is creating a federal police force that can basically go anywhere in any state and interrogate anyone. And again, just go back to this example of this family in Acton, where a husband who hadn't committed any crimes, he's a truck driver, small business owner, just goes off to a rest area, and he is detained, I'm guessing, because of how he looked, and was asked if he has any legal papers, and just based on that fact, even though he talked about how he hadn't committed any crimes, he has 2 young children at home, he has a wife who depends on their income, that he was arrested and held in jail for 2 weeks. So I just don't think that's a good system. Yes?
Thank you for coming today. It's a great discussion. I totally take your points on the dignity of people in their own homes and the ability to feel safe in one's home.
Yeah, it's a great question. So making the point that given the fact that, you know, United States, there is a birth rate that is declining, and therefore we need more immigrants coming to this country. Obviously, it's a nation of immigrants, and the impact of removing 11 million workers from the economy, and then what can you do to help advocate? So I will say, I mean, I think one of the interesting dynamics is, of course, those who are undocumented are afraid to come forth for the most part and testify and speak out, and we saw that at the Acton Town Hall, where there was a discussion over, you know, Acton becoming a welcoming community or sanctuary town, and there were no undocumented immigrants there to speak out because, of course, they're afraid and feeling very vulnerable. So I think, you know, certainly if you know a family that's undocumented telling their story, like I have this morning, I think, you know, certainly, you know, letters to the editor are very helpful. And I think making that point, as you did, about the impact on the economy, is that I think one of the important things to realize is that more often than not, undocumented immigrants are doing the jobs that Americans don't want to. You know, if you go into a supermarket, any supermarket in Acton, if you go into Dunkin' Donuts, if you go into a gas station, a fair number of those workers are undocumented. So they're doing jobs that, you know, we have a very low unemployment rate in Massachusetts. Speaking about population growth, we have a growing crisis in Massachusetts. And I say crisis not to be disrespectful to anyone who's older, but the quickest growing population in Massachusetts are those who are 60 or over. So, and that's wonderful. I love senior citizens, but where are we going to find the workers to fill those jobs?
Let's reframe her question. What can we do to help people come here legally?
No, Chuck, I really have to say, we've known each other a few years. You're being deeply disrespectful because I'm calling out for different people to ask questions, and I think you really need to calm down.
You don't think that's a good question?
Again, you really need to calm down. And you're actually hurting your argument, so, yes.
Hypothetically, as a church, if we were to declare ourselves a sanctuary facility, which in truth we always are, but to declare it the community, what are the legal ramifications to that congregation? Are there any?
Yeah, great question. So if St. Matthew's was to declare itself a sanctuary, what are the legal implications? My general sense is that the term sanctuary city or sanctuary community or declaring an institution as a place of sanctuary, it has no legal effect. It's really a statement of values. So there wouldn't be any legal effect. So far, ICE has, for the most part, said that they won't raid churches, but that could change. So I do wonder how that could impact things, depending on what the church does.
I'm thinking of possible, would they really arrest a pastor as the head of that particular church?
Would they arrest the pastor? I don't know. Pastor Steve, what do you think? As someone who was arrested in November, it wasn't that pleasant, so, yeah. Yes.
So I have a question. I mean, my understanding is under current federal law, if you're born in this country, you're a citizen.
Right.
So a lot of these families you're talking about, their kids are U.S. citizens. Some of them might actually be married to U.S. citizens. So isn't there some sort of process, especially for those people who are parents? I mean, and I would think that there should be some for them to be able to be expedited, because to me it makes no sense to break up families. I mean, these kids then are going to become wards of the state, and I don't see any purpose in that. So I guess my question is, if their kids are here U.S. citizens, they've been here for years, I mean, is there anything under current federal law that kind of gets them into a different process or line, if you will, to be here legally?
Yeah, so the question is there a process for someone who's undocumented or part of a mixed status family where one spouse is undocumented, one is legal, and the kids, if they're born in the U.S. are automatically U.S. citizens? for the person who's undocumented to become legal. So yeah, so that's really the current law. So I know a number of families where someone, you know, maybe overstayed their visa, but, you know, they were married to someone who was a legal permanent resident or a citizen, and so they became legal. So that's the process now. And you know, I really do want to highlight, I know there's this immediate focus on violating immigration law, but just to give you an example of, you know, actions the state takes all the time dealing with other people who break the law, is that for the past 2 budget sessions, we have included in our budget, and this is literally the name of the program, a tax amnesty program. So what is the legislature trying to do there? It's people that fail to pay their taxes over many, many years, which again is a violation of federal law, and it allows them to come in and pay their taxes and avoid the penalty in the public interest of getting more revenue for the state. So that's actually a state law that legislators passed that deals with a federal violation, but a public policy purpose of allowing people to pay their taxes and not getting that penalty. So it's important to emphasize that I know there's this sort of focus on breaking federal immigration law, but there are every day a wide variety of federal laws that many people break without any punishment. And some people will say to me it's a bit of a reach, but I will say one of my great frustrations after the 2008 financial crash is that Wall Street brokers, bankers who clearly violated federal law and bankrupted millions of families in this country, and not a single one of them went to jail. That to me is outrageous, and you want to talk about impact on this country, obviously people that are still recovering from the Wall Street crash of 2008. Yes?
I'm happy to be here today. I'm not a member of this congregation, but happy to be here. So, first of all, I'd like to say, just point out the great hypocrisy that I'm guessing most of you have no idea if your ancestors were legal immigrants or not. Do any of you know?
What does that have to do with anything?
Maybe they were, maybe they weren't. I mean, I have ancestors that came in 1630s and ones that came at the turn of the century, and you know, I am so proud of my immigrant heritage, and I think that drives me a lot to care about this problem. Just yesterday I heard about a young mother with 3 children who was detained by ICE as she was shopping at Target with her 8-year-old daughter. Her husband is a citizen. She's part of the DACA program. She's been a law-abiding, church-going, wonderful mother and citizen since she came to the U.S. with her family when she was a very young child. So in this case, I just wonder, what is the point of deporting someone like this? I mean, she's leaving a 2-year-old baby and a 4-year-old and a husband with these young children. It just doesn't make sense to me at all that this would be, why aren't they going after the bad guys? I guess that's what it just simply doesn't make sense. It seems cowardly and wrong to go after a young mother who's obviously been trying year after year. She's trying to go through the process and has been trying her whole life to become a citizen, and it makes no sense. It seems morally wrong to me.
So I think it would be difficult for me to
Sorry.
repeat that statement, but yeah, why is the U.S. government now targeting those who haven't broken any crimes but are undocumented versus those who committed serious crimes? And that was, even though it was somewhat flawed, that was generally the policy of President Obama, is to focus on those that were violent criminals who were undocumented and focus on getting them deported. And the executive order by President Trump has really changed that standard. So, yes, Peg?
What is the process for somebody that's here illegally if they want to become a legal citizen?
Yeah, so people do, people who are undocumented can apply to become a legal resident, and if you're married to someone who's a U.S. citizen, if you have been here 20 or 30 years and have paid your taxes, then often the courts will grant you becoming a legal resident. It's really a case-by-case basis. Obviously, if you are not paying your taxes, if you have been in this country a relatively short amount of time, I would say you're most likely going to get deported. But if you have ties and you've been in the community for a long time, then often it can lead to becoming a legal U.S. citizen. So, but it's a court process. Yep. Yes, sir.
I believe it was the last speaker that was here was telling us about an undocumented person who contacted a lawyer to find out what the process is, had an interview scheduled with federal immigration people, went to the first interview, and when they walked out of the office, they got arrested by ICE.
Mm-hmm.
So my question is, are there places that ICE cannot go, or is ICE able to go in?
So the question is, the example of someone who had contacted a lawyer to become a legal U.S. citizen, went to the office to apply for a green card or for citizenship and was arrested at the office. I don't know, is that the Lawrence example or something else? Okay. Just as an aside, and some people may have read about it, is that there were 5 individuals who went to the Lawrence INS office to apply to become legal citizens, and the ICE agent was right outside and arrested them. So they were, they had their interview with the government to become citizens. One of those persons was another constituent of mine from Sudbury. So that person was just released from jail last week. So ICE agents, and that's sort of my critique, for those that are sort of have very strong feelings or perhaps opposed to the bill I filed, just from a principal point of view, I really find the idea of sort of a federal police very disturbing. The idea that you would have, an ICE agent that could go anywhere in the country, could, come to this church, could come to where someone works, could go to the courthouse and arrest someone. I find very, very disturbing. It's quite an expansion of federal power. But yeah, that's what ICE agents essentially can do. In Massachusetts, I would say it's not as bad as other states, but I think we are seeing more and more aggressiveness from ICE agents. Yes?
Because we have promised to honor Jamie's schedule, and because I feel very strongly about allowing him to have a breath and maybe a little more food and so on, perhaps if we could take one more question from someone who has not had a chance to speak.
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir. I didn't quite understand this from the ICE agent, but the FBI is a federal agency which operates in the United States. You keep saying you're worried about, a federal police force, but isn't the FBI a federal police force in many ways?
But the FBI works on federal crimes, but I guess the difference is that if you see your typical ICE agent, they're dressed like in a suit, right? ICE agents have the word police on them, and they are literally walking around certain communities in Massachusetts, and they're going to courthouses. I don't think you're going to see an FBI agent, act like that. An FBI agent is very targeted, so I think it is distinct. We're talking about sort of law enforcement versus sort of high-level, serious, federal or national crimes. So I think there's a distinction. So thank you so much for coming, and I really do appreciate all the questions, both the positive and challenging questions. I really do. Immigration law is very complex. The judicial system is very complex, and I really appreciate this church's willingness to have this dialogue because it is complicated, and thank you so much for asking me to speak this morning.